Je vais parler entre français et anglais, ça sera un peu l'esprit de tout le séminaire. Donc je vais passer à l'anglais pour que les gens puissent facilement me suivre. Voilà, je le dis notamment à Thierno, Laurent, Emmanuelle, la langue d'intervention peut être aussi bien le français, aussi bien pour les questions, donc n'hésitez pas si vous voulez. John a une très bonne compréhension du français, mais il s'exprimera plutôt en anglais. Alors, bienvenue aujourd'hui à ce séminaire LAM et chaire Diasporas africaines, qui va se concentrer sur le dernier livre de John, que j'ai ici en deux versions différentes. Je vous montre, c'est la version américaine, publiée par Chicago University Press, et la version nigériane, encore plus belle, on peut dire, même si on ne pourrait pas le dire en public, avec plein de photos, et qui est publiée par Bookcraft de Lagos. Alors aujourd'hui, de manière assez informelle et amicale, on veut présenter ce livre et le commenter, en parler ensemble. C'est un livre publié en 2016, mais qui n'a peut-être pas encore été présenté en France, donc on prend l'opportunité pour le faire. On est très très content d'avoir John ici. Il est ici dans le cadre d'un festival qui démarre demain, ici à Bordeaux, qui s'appelle Afrique en vision, au cours duquel John interviendra dans deux autres tables rondes. Et je remercie beaucoup Thierno, Emmanuelle et Laurent d'avoir accepté de participer à cette table ronde et de donc commenter et présenter un peu leur lecture de ce livre. On s'est dit, et je le dis notamment à Thierno parce qu'on ne s'était pas encore parlé avant, la structure un peu donc, de ce séminaire aujourd'hui sera la suivante. On donne d'abord la parole à John pour nous introduire un petit peu ce livre et l'histoire derrière ce livre. Et puis on fera un tour de table de commentaires en allant un petit peu en ordre alphabétique tel qu'il était en fait sous la fiche. Donc on donnera la parole à Thierno en premier, à Laurent ensuite et à Emmanuelle après. Et pour terminer, on redonnera la parole à John pour répondre aux commentaires qui ont été faits, et bien sûr à vous dans le public si vous avez des questions, des réflexions, des commentaires à votre tour. Je m'arrête donc ici et je donne la parole à John en essayant de faire marcher le zoom pour que vous le voyez plus de près. John, please. Ah, I forgot to speak in English then. What I'm saying is just, I guess you know it, right? And I'm going to focus on you. So thank you very much, John.
It's a great pleasure to be here. As Alessandro said, I'll speak in English. That will be less painful for everyone, I think. But, please do ask questions in French. Anyway, I wanted to start just by saying two things very informally. One is, it's a long book. If you drop it on your foot, it'll hurt a little bit. And Brian Larkin, who was one of the readers for the University of Chicago Press and is a friend of ours, told me more than once that if the book were half as long as it is, it would have 4 times as many readers. And, I always understood that this was completely true, but I'm self-directed and I can also be stubborn. So the first version Brian read, actually, even I agreed was much, much, much too long. So I spent 6 months of my life shortening the book by about 1/3, but without cutting anything major out of it, because I refused to give anything up. So I thought, well, if I take 1 word out of every sentence, that will shorten it by maybe 15%, and I can just work like that. So that's what I did. I just kind of squeezed things out of it. Anyway, you know, I really appreciate those of you who've been handed this big book and asked to deal with it on short notice. The preface, this is the other thing I wanted to say, was the last part of it that I wrote. The book it's based on really 20 years of research, and the writing itself took 2 or 3 years. And then the editing. The preface came last, and it really is my favorite part of the book. So those of you who have at least gotten that far can maybe rest. Partly because I started out with a description of Legos, and you know, I just wanted the basic ground out of which the study came and out of which the films came, to be in front of the reader from the beginning. And I hadn't mixed that kind of writing with academic work before on anything like that scale. And I really like doing it. It's less boring. And anyway, I, you know, kind of found a new direction for myself as I put that together. The other thing was that the very last thing I wrote was the last part of the preface where, I mean, there's a little sort of hymn to Nollywood as what, the bearer of the Nigerian spirit or something, but also a tribute to the values that, that the films embody. And that came actually out of the teaching, which I'd been doing for years. A whole lot of what I was doing was kind of introducing students to Africa on a pretty basic level. And, you know, teaching Achebe's Things Fall Apart every semester, year after year, which I never got tired of doing. And at a certain point, I began reflecting on this and feeling like the reason for that was I really cared about what I was saying. And that what I was really trying to communicate to the students was, you know, Africans have values, which they hold very deeply and, you know, feel very profound to me. And you don't find this just in a few places. It's spread across the society. And the films are full of them. They're full of people, you know, the reactions of more or less ordinary people having moral reactions, spiritual reactions, and so on to things. And, you know, again, I realized that this was at the base of a lot of what I had been doing, kind of only at the very end. I like the idea also because it seemed like the most outrageous thing you could say about Nollywood films, is because their reputation was that they were trash and they were scandalous and that they were, you know, just kind of the opposite of this thing that I was seeing in them. So there was a kind of perverse pleasure in, you know, mounting that kind of argument. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say to begin.
Thank you very much, John. So without taking more time, I just pass and give the floor to Thierno. Thierno, ton micro est en bas.
Bien, bonjour à tout le monde. Bienvenue, John. Ça fait 10 ans, je pense, on s'est écrit un peu pour le site Africiné, dont je suis rédacteur en chef aussi, en tant que journaliste, avec Jaman, qui nous avait mis en contact. Ce livre, effectivement, est très important. Il ouvre une large perspective sur le cinéma de Nollywood, à la fois aussi sur le plan historique et aussi certaines figures à la fois sur l'histoire même de Nollywood et aussi ces évolutions qu'on voit, dont la figure la figure la plus emblématique à l'heure d'aujourd'hui semble être Kunle Afolayan. Et justement, le film se termine juste au moment où il commence à vraiment prendre son envol avec the COA, The Citation, qu'on peut retrouver sur Netflix, traduit par La Convocation, qui est tourné entre le Nigeria, le Cap-Vert et le Sénégal. Et aussi cette figure aussi de Tunde Kelani aussi, qui est un peu le sorte de patriarche de ce cinéma. Euh, et euh, et aussi ce qui interpelle quand on aborde le cinéma de Nollywood, c'est curieusement, enfin, quand on parle de cinéma de Nollywood et le professeur Haynes dit bien, souligne bien que toute l'industrie du cinéma nigériane n'est pas Nollywood. Et ça, c'est très important. Or, souvent, il y a la confusion de croire que tout ce qui sort du Nigeria, c'est Nollywood, comme si de dire tout le cinéma indien, c'est Bollywood. Et cette nuance-là ne se retrouve pas souvent assez mise en avant, assez soulignée. Et dans cet ouvrage, on voit bien ce distinguo aussi, avant d'arriver à Nollywood, aussi il y a tout l'héritage, colonial aussi. Avec cette analyse très juste que vous faites sur euh, comment dans le cinéma colonial, la colonisation française, le système colonial français a plutôt freiné l'arrivée des Africains au cinéma pour se former, comme les Belges d'ailleurs. Euh, et alors que dans le cinéma colonial britannique, dont relève le Nigeria, il y avait une formation des techniciens, il y avait, euh, il y avait leur inclusion dans l'industrie du cinéma, alors que dans le cinéma français, il faudra attendre quasiment 1954 avec Paulin Soumano Vieira à la FEMI, enfin l'IDEC, qui est l'actuel FEMIS, l'Institut des hautes études études cinématographiques à Paris, pour avoir des Africains francophones se former de manière euh, plus, comment dire, formelle. Euh, et le paradoxe aussi, c'est-à-dire que les Anglais ont inclus, mais après les indépendances, ils se sont un peu retirés. Ils se sont retirés. Alors que dans le sens inverse, les Français, comme vous le montrez, les Français qui n'étaient pas très investis ou qui désinvestissaient les Africains du cinéma, après les indépendances, vont plutôt s'investir plus pour soutenir par la formation, par la production. Saint-Ben Ousmane, par exemple, du Sénégal, va avoir l'aide à l'avance sur recette du CNC, Centre national du cinéma. Euh, enfin, c'est surtout la volonté d'un homme, Jean-René Debrix, au sein du ministère de la coopération qui va accompagner ce mouvement, avec aussi des techniciens français comme André Daventure qui vont accompagner ce mouvement. Et dans le même temps, il a manqué au Nigeria cet appui institutionnel, si bien que ceux qui vont plutôt émerger, c'est comme le père de Kunle Afolayan d'ailleurs, qui mélange le théâtre et le cinéma, et puis qui sont pas seulement qu'au Nigeria, qui voyagent aussi pour aller montrer leurs films au Ghana, et qui est directeur de sa propre compagnie, qui gère une sorte de famille d'acteurs, et qui sont à la fois sur la scène de théâtre et sur la scène de film, de cinéma, et donc qui, euh, qui ont des possibilités financières, des rentrées d'argent financières qui leur permet d'être autonomes. Alors que dans le système francophone, c'est plutôt l'institution, l'État français qui va aider à soutenir, et les États africains vont même avoir tendance à essayer de bloquer ces aides françaises, parce qu'à un moment, ça critiquait les régimes autoritaires ou dictatoriaux comme ceux de Léopold Sédar Senghor ou d'autres. Et donc, c'est aussi cette dimension-là, euh, c'est pas seulement ce qui est intéressant dans cet ouvrage, c'est pas seulement un point de vue donc sur Nollywood, mais aussi qu'est-ce que ça représente pour le continent et aussi sa diaspora. Euh, euh, Après, il y a un élément qu'on ne retrouve pas assez, à mon sens. Enfin, c'est une figure, justement, peut-être parce que une figure qui émerge juste au moment où John Haynes clôt sur son ouvrage, c'est quelqu'un comme Akin Omotozo avec son film Man on Ground, où qui va réinterroger en tant que Sud-Africain de parents nigérians la relation entre ces deux pays et aussi de critiquer la xénophobie, les actes de violence contre les expatriés africains en Afrique du Sud avec, avec une double diaspora d'ailleurs, puisque c'est un ses deux frères, l'un a disparu et l'autre vit à Londres, donc une autre diaspora qui vient chercher son frère en Afrique du Sud et qui est pris qui se rend compte qu'il a été victime des violences contre les Africains que les Sud-Africains, curieusement majoritairement noirs, ont appliqué contre les autres Africains, surtout noirs. Et donc ce cinéma aussi, ici dans le cas de euh, Man on Ground de Akinomotozo, montre aussi toute la complexité des nations africaines, du panafricanisme, aussi de ces diasporas qui n'ont pas forcément les, euh, les mêmes implantations, par exemple, entre ceux qui sont aux États-Unis et ceux qui sont sur le continent africain. Euh, et il y a de ça, c'est-à-dire cette diaspora nigériane implantée sur le continent, dont les films sont peut-être moins différenciés, différenciés par rapport au Nollywood de manière générale. Je terminerai par aussi un aspect. J'étais à Toulouse ce week-end et il y a le cinéaste Newton Adwaka qui a fait donc Rage, tourné en, en Angleterre et qui est le premier film britannique fait par un noir à être diffusé de manière large sur le continent, sur le pays, dans toute l'Angleterre, et qui estime que Nollywood, ce n'est pas du cinéma, donc qui est très critique par rapport à cette pratique de Nollywood. Je parlais tout à l'heure de Ola Balogun, enfin non, j'en ai pas parlé, mais j'ai pensé à lui tout à l'heure, mais Ola Balogun aussi dans le film de Mohamed Chalouf, le documentaire de 1999 qui s'appelle Ouaga, capitale du cinéma, où Ola Balogun dit que Nollywood, ce n'est pas du cinéma et il donne la genèse que c'était aussi que parce que avec la dictature militaire, les gens ne pouvaient plus aller sortir avec le couvre-feu dans le soir. Et donc, finalement, c'était par la télévision que Nollywood, que les Nigérians pouvaient avoir des images, et c'est ainsi que Nollywood est né. Et il mettait l'accent sur justement cette dimension télévisée qui est qui est l'ADN en fait finalement de Nollywood et qui a marqué le fait que beaucoup de films manquent de cinéma, de mon point de vue ou de ceux qui le critiquent, sur notre média panafricain Africiné, africiné.org. On a publié plusieurs textes de Nigérians surtout, comme Didi Cheka ou Femi Odugbemi, qui est le directeur du festival IREP à Londres, qui dit que Nollywood n'est pas du cinéma et marque beaucoup de distance. Et d'ailleurs, c'est pour ça que dans l'industrie du cinéma nigérian, il n'y a pas une sorte de cohésion parce que il y en a qui se revendiquent de Nollywood et d'autres qui se disent Nollywood, c'est pas du cinéma, même si il nuance beaucoup parce que ce cinéma de Nollywood aussi est en train de changer. il n'est plus aussi télévisé que, par exemple, quand on voit la dernière production de Kunle Afolayan, par exemple, The Citation, a beaucoup plus de densité cinématographique que Mokalik, par exemple, qui, pendant 30 minutes, c'est comme si on allait prendre des cours de mécanique. Donc, il y a aussi, oui, enfin, ça tourne en rond, ça tourne en rond, et dans il y a une dimension de cinéma beaucoup plus affirmée et les nouvelles technologies aussi, par exemple Canon, la marque Canon qui à l'heure d'aujourd'hui travaille avec quelqu'un comme Kunle Afolayan pour soutenir la nouvelle génération et avoir accès à du matériel de qualité, du matériel numérique, ça upgrade, ça renforce le niveau de qualité aussi et de cinéma finalement de la production de Nollywood. Euh, voilà, de manière assez ramassée, euh, ce qu'implique Nollywood aujourd'hui. Après, le fait d'être sur Netflix peut être trompeur, c'est-à-dire de dire c'est comme si Netflix, avec, en tant que plateforme de streaming, donne une sorte de label de qualité. Or, moi, comme beaucoup d'autres universitaires ou journalistes, on se dit aussi, en cinéma, le premier label, c'est aussi la sélection dans les festivals et non pas être dans une sorte de particularité. Festival du cinéma, Nollywood, Nollywood Film Festival, Nollywood ceci, Nollywood à Paris, mais que un film de Nollywood n'a pas à demander presque de s'excuser d'être de Nollywood, mais de dire on fait du cinéma, on est des Nigérians, on est de Nollywood et on fait un cinéma de qualité et qui peut être rivalisé avec celui de Wes Anderson ou de Mahama Saleh Haroun ou d'autres cinéastes et qui puissent être, comment dire, reconnus pour leur qualité. Et aujourd'hui, c'est le problème de Nollywood, d'être dans ce que j'appelle un ronronnement un peu de on est bien entre nous, etc. Et au festival, à la Cinémathèque de Toulouse, samedi à la table ronde avec Newton Adwaka, il le disait que quand il a pris la direction artistique du festival Afrif à Lagos, créé par la productrice Chuma Oude, que pendant 3 ans, 3 éditions, son ambition, c'était aussi d'ouvrir les Nigérians et les cinéastes de Nollywood à des films qui ne sont pas que dans Nollywood, qu'ils puissent aussi voir aussi d'autres films, être en confrontation avec d'autres films qui ne soient pas seulement des films du Nigeria, des films de Nollywood. Et ça aussi, voilà, c'est pour dire que dans l'industrie du cinéma au Nigeria, il y a aussi une remise en cause de Nollywood et pour les chercheurs ou les universitaires. Et aussi, je terminerai, j'ai cherché pour préparer ce séminaire aussi, j'avais trouvé un auteur qui disait avec beaucoup de justesse que on nous dit que parfois certains auteurs nous disent que c'est la plus grande industrie de cinéma au monde, Nollywood, parce qu'ils produisent 2000 films par an. Ils sont où ces 2000 films? Et puis sur quoi on se base pour dire qu'il y a 2000 films? Où sont les chiffres officiels? Et donc, s'il y avait 2000 films avec de la qualité, même sur 100, on les verrait en compétition, en confrontation, pour utiliser le mot du cinéaste sénégalais Djibril Diop Mambéty, être en confrontation avec d'autres films de qualité. Et c'est voilà, j'espère n'avoir pas été trop dispersé dans mon intervention, mais c'était ce que je voulais voilà, apporter.
Merci Thierno, et comment dire, c'est bien, tu as lancé des pierres qui vont amener sur des débats qui sont un peu des débats désormais aussi classiques dans le monde des études de cinéma africain, de Nollywood, qui ramènent à des controverses qui ont toute une histoire et sur lesquelles je connais les positions de John et je m'attends à rebondissement. Mais je ne lui donne pas encore la parole. Il doit arriver avant de te répondre. Mais merci beaucoup pour tes réflexions très intéressantes. Et je me rends compte, parce que je fais en fait tout le temps comme ça, étant que je suis parmi des amis, je n'ai pas du tout fait le travail de modérateur en présentant en due et bonne forme John en premier et Thierno ensuite. Mais je pense que dans le public qui est ici, finalement, on se connaît un petit peu. John a enseigné pendant plusieurs années à la Long Island University de New York et il est maintenant heureusement retraité depuis pas longtemps. Et il a fait une grande partie de sa carrière en travaillant sur Nollywood, et ce qui en fait une des plus grandes autorités, on pourrait dire, au monde sur ce thème. Et Thierno, lui aussi, travaille depuis de longues années sur la cinématographie, je dirais plutôt africaine francophone, mais avec un regard panafricain très large, et anime, comme il a rappelé, la revue en ligne Africiné, qui est tout à fait une référence fondamentale, je dirais, notamment pour ceux qui sont les ressources en ligne. Et il enseigne également le cinéma ici à Bordeaux, Montaigne.
Oui, peut-être juste, pardon,
oui.
juste corriger que souvent, c'est vrai, mes recherches portent sur les cinémas africains, mais aussi Diasporas. Par exemple, Haïti ou les Africains américains, Spike Lee, etc., c'est aussi dans mes champs de recherche, même si je publie pas forcément, mais ou de manière... Oui, voilà. Et
Oui,
j'enseigne aussi à l'université. Et j'enseigne aussi à l'université de Niamey au Niger. Où est mon laboratoire de rattachement.
Merci pour les précisions, Thierno. Et je passerai maintenant la parole à Laurent. Donc, je vais élargir un petit peu le cadre pour qu'on puisse le voir. Laurent Fourchard, chercheur au CERI à Paris, à Sciences Paris, lui aussi expert Nigeria, de la ville et relations ville-violence parmi d'autres thématiques. Il a travaillé pas mal aussi en Afrique du Sud. Je ne vais pas dire trop de choses non plus. Je lui laisse la parole en te remerciant encore, Laurent, d'avoir accepté cette invitation.
Merci Alessandro, à toi de m'inviter. Moi qui suis totalement ignare sur le cinéma de Nollywood, j'ai appris tellement de choses dans ce livre que je suis ravi de pouvoir le commenter. Donc depuis mon point de vue d'historien et de politiste du Nigeria, donc je ne peux pas rentrer dans une... Je commence en français puis je continuerai en anglais après. Je ne vais pas entrer dans une discussion autour de ce qu'est, si Nollywood est du cinéma ou pas, comme le fait si bien Thierno. Moi, je ne peux pas rentrer dans cette discussion spécialiste. Je vais plutôt me poser d'un point de vue d'historien et de politiste en prenant quelques passages qui, moi, m'ont particulièrement interpellé et sur lesquels j'ai envie de t'entendre. I think the size of the book, the length of the book is strange too. I mean, because I mean all the details are there. I mean, are very necessary for the understanding of the larger social and political systems in Nigeria. So for me, it's long. It's not anymore common. But I mean, you were brave to resist Brian asking of reduce the book. I think it's excellent because it can be read like a book because it's a fundamental academic book, but also like a Bible in a way, dictionary. And a dictionary because there's two indexes at the end. Really helps to go back to any movies and any producers, filmmakers, actors, and so on and so forth. So this is really excellent for that. So I will just stick to three dimensions, which is just partial dimension of something which is much more comprehensive, which is around something that intrigued me about, well, the documentary dimension versus the fictional dimension. So that will be one point. Another point will be about the classification of the different genres in the book, focusing especially, and you won't be surprised as a political scientist, on especially what is a political film genre. So why do we classify this as a political film? And eventually, I will come back to the issue the chapter 7 or 8, I think, on vigilant and crime vigilant and village film. I also like the idea of articulating these three words together, and in coming back to a few themes into that chapter. So the first point is, I think that the fundamental interest of your work for me is that you permanently tries to disentangle and articulate the documentary dimension and the fictional aspects of Nollywood cinema. And so a new very mode of writing helps a lot to do that, because you start systematically to present the movie, the filmmaker, the actors, the producers, the synopsis, so we have a full idea of the movie, and then you move to a kind of social science approach of the movie or set of movie, and so you dialogue with the classical literature in anthropology, political science, history around Nigeria, which makes actually all these movies are the kind of primary sources to understand Nigeria at large. So for me, it's really a way of taking seriously those movies to understand Nigeria. So you mentioned it initially, and Thierno mentioned it too. I mean, the problem with the Nigerian movie is that it is suspect. It is, in a way, it is always seen by all the cinephiles as a commercial venture, a pure commercial venture with a bit of sex, a bit of melodrama, a bit of witchcraft, which is probably this, but which is not only this. And so this is the point of the book. It is not only this. And the only is very important in the book. Because seeing the Nollywood cinema only through this is, of course, a very a ridiculous vision of Nollywood, which you contest in for each theme. Even if you admit that what you call the rich quick themes are central features of Nigerian movies. So you have to make money out of a movie, and so you have to find the rich quick theme that is striking at what specific moments. And so you give so many examples of that, which is really interesting. So movie, as you start telling the movie, you come up with depending on the movies, of course, but with stories, narratives that are odd, extravagant, or fantasy. I like this lady, ironically called Tokumbo in the movie. So all Nigerians know what is a Tokumbo. So Tokumbo is second-hand car. And so this lady, Tokumbo, which is in this movie called Dark Goddess, 1995, produced by Owoyemi. So this is an intriguing lady, which is very wealthy, who is a killer, who tried to get rid of all the potential political enemy, who get married with an advisor of the president, who kill off many members of the family, who have a husband to kill himself, to suicide himself. So it's a kind of extravagant story. But you mentioned at the end that if you just look the movie like this, okay, it's pure fantasy, it's pure Nollywood style, but in producing that in 1995, you will reveal actually what is the possibility of the first ladies to act like this, so Babangida lady, or the first lady or Mayam Abasha. Maybe it's a kind of metaphor of this, of the performance, political, sexual, economic performance of this lady. And I found this quite convincing. So you have this kind of systematic attention to reveal the historical context of production of these movies. And you do that, and at the same time, as you mentioned at the beginning, and which is clear all along the movie, that is, there is a projection of normative values very much all along in each movie, which are very important. So how a president or a politician should act correctly. It's also very much in the background of many movies. So even in the crime genre film, which seems to be a secondary genre in Nollywood, I don't know, but it seems to, and it's very much criticized again, Thierno, outside of Nigeria, for being exaggeratedly melodramatic or based on supernatural power. But here again, instead of just mentioning that, you mention that this reveal en creux a way of doing crime movie without detectives, without police officers, without courts, because it does not appear in the imagination of the popular imagination of Nigeria, which is very interesting in itself on what reveals what it's revealing to the state apparatus in the imagination of Nigeria. So that's because the first comment about this two-dimension of the commentary and the fictional aspect in the Nollywood cinema, which is so well written. So moving to the classification, I was asking myself, maybe I read you too quickly. I was asking myself, how did you organize yourself to classify? Actually, was it a process that is coming from the grassroots, that is coming from the professionals, that is coming from the spectators, or that is coming from academics, including yourself? So that is interesting. If you look at, for instance, the political film as a genre, you mentioned that the people decide that it is a political film. So, but it's the people. Who are the people? I mean, so are they the producers, the filmmakers, the speaker? I mean, the scholars, or anything else? So maybe I would like to hear you about this classification. You also mentioned that for political film, it seems also to be a minor genre, especially before 2000. You mentioned only one movie, Babangida Must Go, released in 1993. This I really would like to watch this movie, and I think you have a publication on this movie.
I do, yeah.
Which seems to be fascinating because it was made at the time, or even before, or at the time when President Babangida was forced out of office. And it was made during the Lagos insurrection, which is known. But you said that it was only one during the military regime. I mean, there was only one movie that you qualify as political during that period. Maybe I misread you. And you mentioned the fact that there was a strong surveillance by the state security services, plus the fact that many filmmakers were in a precarious situation, that they could not get a risk of producing that kind of political film. Okay. So my question related to the fact that in 2000, so with the fact that, okay, so the kind of opening of the political space, so maybe all the political films were released, and so you mentioned a film on Obasanjo. But maybe I'm wrong, but I'm not too sure that there were so many political film genres that were released after 2000. So has the state security services not anymore so much upset with what is said about the political class? Why there is this decrease, but this lack of interest in what you referred as political movie? Okay, and so maybe that's the last question related to the political, is the fact that what does it mean to have a political film? Is it because you qualify this as, or you or others qualify this as political because it refers to people who have vested authorities, so like the president, governors, the classical figures of the political landscape in Nigeria, the godfathers, or, so that's a very classical definition of politics. But so many other things might be qualified as politics. So, re-qualifying the past might be considered as a political act, or doing a vigilant film could be considered as a political act because you are criticizing in a way the very way the justice is not operating in Nigeria. So, so why using that specific qualification to give an account on these vested authorities representing the president and other politicians? So, and my last question, maybe I'm too long. No. Yeah, it's in chapters 7 or 8 on crime vigilant and village films, chapter 7. I found it quite fascinating that you arranged the 3 groups together, not so much crime and vigilant, which seems to be obvious, but crime vigilant and village films. As for me, I mean, that was first a new urban issue before probably becoming a rural issue, and it's both a rural and urban issue, the issue of vigilantism. And so why relate that to village film? It's a bit of intriguing question to me. And here I would like to come back to a movie, Isakaba, that we watched together with Alessandro. Alessandro came for a class in some of my students, and so he always presents some of extract from Isakaba, which is fascinating. And so here again, I mean, there is a kind of quasi-sociological dimension of this movie, which is Isakaba, of course, refers to the Bakassi boys, which were operating in Onitsha and Aba in the late 1990s. And so there is this quasi-sociological dimension of some vigilant movies, but at the same time, and this is what is fascinating in the way you analyze it, and especially in the first, second, third, and fourth part of the movie, is the fact that there is the efficiency of the group to get rid of criminals is well informed, and then you have also at the same time a kind of profound distrust of the populations towards the justice and the police. But towards the end of the last episode, there is a deception of the Bakassi boys moving into a kind of corrupt and criminal groups. And you mentioned, and that is where it's intriguing me, the Human Rights Watch report released at the same time as Alonso Imasuen movie, as if he was informed by kind of evidences that were provided by this report. So more generally, I would like to know, because you know Lancelot, you know him, Emmanuelle also, and so the question also relates to the fact that is he also looking for documentary evidences to produce his movie, especially for that? Did he go there to get information, or is it just only navigating on the kind of public opinion about the perception of Bakassi boys who were first considered as heroes and then turned into criminals? So what is his documentary basis for producing his movie is interesting to me. The last point I will make, and this, of course, this is a fictional dimension, because I'm here sticking to the documentary dimension, but of course there is a whole fictional dimension in the movie. Here, what is interesting and important is the fact that Lancelot Imasuen produced a movie based on exceptional groups. The Bakassi boys were an exceptional group compared to many other vigilant groups in Nigeria. It was national stories. It was not the local stuff. And you mentioned that after the Bakassi, disappeared or actually get captured by the state, the genre also disappeared in a way. So to me, the question is, okay, here there is a rich, quick theme to focus on. Okay, we have the Bakassi, so that's a good theme to focus on, and we are going to have a good movie on that. So I'm not going to look at what I mean, the ethnography said Lucy is here, but she really indicates how vigilant groups in Nigeria are totally just the regular vigilant group operating in the city are not that figure. They are not often violent. They are not often relying on juju or witchcraft. They are participating and cooperating with the police on a regular basis. So I don't know if Lucy is there. So yeah, so that's, and I think that's a quite interesting ways of understanding vigilantism. So in other words, this movie, like many other movies, or like all the crime fiction that were that's the crime novel that were also repertoriés, so catalogued or listed by some of your colleagues. Focus on this exceptional character, but in focusing on this exceptional character, you give an idea of Nigeria as being a violent country through this movie and through all the kind of media, of just only being only a kind of violent country reacting very violently against armory, while actually it's not. Of course, the empirical reality is more complicated. This is not what I say. They, in a way, contributed to the reputation of Nigeria as being a violent country. This is even including in this movie. So, and as Lancelot is also very progressive in a way, is he really have an idea of he's contributing to this so bad image of Nigeria outside of Nigeria? So, and I will stop here because I spoke for too long.
Thank you very much, Laurent. That was also very, very interesting. And this is the pleasure of having around the table people that have a different disciplinary background and research experience, which brings different perspective about the book and Nollywood and John's work. So, and in this sense, we move on to the third presenter. Emmanuelle is visible in the image there. So Emmanuelle Spiesse, who is an art historian by training and works à cheval entre the lycée d'Assaut and the University here, since Po Bordeaux, where she is chargée de cours of a number of courses. And she has been working a lot on Nigerian visual art, so this is one of the reasons why we have her here today. So, Emmanuelle, merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup de ton invitation, Alessandro. Je suis très contente d'être avec vous pour discuter de ce livre extraordinaire. Extraordinaire parce que, très très impressionnant, peut-être par son poids, mais surtout pour tous les informations qu'il contient, non seulement sur Nollywood Movies, sur un ensemble de films complètement différents. Et surtout, ce qui m'a énormément plu, c'est déjà l'histoire de Nollywood, depuis l'histoire de la télévision nigériane. So, sorry, you can see that I speak French. Maybe I will switch later in English. Et donc, je suis très, très impressionnée aussi de voir à quel point vous avez continuellement essayé d'être si précis sur d'avoir la volonté de contextualiser chacun de ces films. Donc, je vais travailler cette lecture aujourd'hui. Je vais vous proposer ma lecture de ce livre à travers trois thématiques, dont la première tourne autour des languages. Nollywood is a Nollywood languages, because you say that in the first chapters of your book, you show us how able was Nollywood to reinforce to the building of a united Nigeria. Et donc, à quel point, en fait, les langues nigérianes étaient importantes, la langue était importante dans le film, et à quel point les réalisateurs étaient attentifs à la fois incorporé du pidgin, à la fois du yoruba, à la fois du Igbo, du Hausa ou autre langue nigériane, et bien sûr, évidemment, l'anglais. Donc, j'ai bien compris aussi que pour avoir un caractère très, très fédéral et fédérateur du public nigérian autour des films nigérians, il fallait aussi avoir des thématiques communes, par exemple Get Rich Quickly, la morale, l'immoralité, la sécurité, la justice, les armed robberies, le pouvoir, la prostitution, l'émancipation. Donc tout cela, toutes ces thématiques étaient aussi sont aussi toutes très importantes pour constituer un public. Et je me suis interrogée sur la place des langages nigérians aujourd'hui dans les films que produit Nollywood. Et est-ce que on sait très bien qu'il y a une grande facilité pour ces films à être dupliqués, trouver des sous-titres facilement de piètre qualité ou de très bonne qualité pour pouvoir justement être exportés. Mais j'aurais voulu savoir quel était le choix aujourd'hui des producteurs de Nollywood, des réalisateurs pour les langues nigérianes. Et donc, reprendre une de vos phrases, vous dites à un moment donné que le pidgin, qui est une langue non officielle, est quand même un moyen très, très populaire qui permet justement d'éveiller les consciences populaires. Donc, est-ce que le pidgin aussi est une langue encore très, très utile pour le cinéma nigérian? Et ce qui m'a fait penser aussi m'interroger là-dessus, c'est quand je regardais sur YouTube les remarques des spectateurs qui regardent régulièrement les Nollywood Vintage, et ils disent mais à cette époque, au moment donc Living in Bondage, mais quel anglais était si bien maîtrisé par les acteurs nigérians. Donc voilà, je voulais savoir ce qu'il en était maintenant de cette facilité ou de ce refus par rapport à la langue anglaise et autres. Le deuxième point que je voudrais soulever, il concerne justement ce cinéma que vous appelez un cinéma d'art total art form. Pourquoi? Parce que à l'intérieur du même film, on a différentes pratiques artistiques, notamment la musique, la danse, les chants, le théâtre. Et un peu plus loin dans le livre, donc je crois que je sais plus, c'est au milieu du livre, page 148, vous mentionnez que le cinéma d'Hollywood a you mentioned that Nollywood cinema has always is a way of raising awareness among children about their past. What school fails to? Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Okay. Children don't know anymore what is a village, how to interact with elderly people. So and it seems that Tunde Kelani is c'est le point de vue en tout cas de Tunde Kelani. Et il semble, ce réalisateur, donc très très sensible à ce problème de comment relier l'enfant d'aujourd'hui, les jeunes d'aujourd'hui, à ce passé. Et je me posais la question de savoir si le cinéma de Nollywood ou le cinéma au Nigeria, un cinéma du Nigeria, s'était vraiment emparé de cette problématique de l'éducation et de comment éduquer les jeunes. Alors vous en parlez à propos donc du travail de Tunde Kelani, et notamment en proposant un cinéma de proximité. un cinéma qui viendrait à la rencontre donc des jeunes et qui ne serait pas donc enfermé dans le monde urbain ultra accessible par une certaine classe de population nigériane, mais au contraire que le cinéma aille dans des quartiers les plus reculés avec des plus petites jauges, mais aille toucher cette jeunesse qui finalement semble s'ennuyer une fois que la batterie de son téléphone est HS. Donc voilà, et puis j'ai beaucoup aimé aussi quand vous mettez en scène Tunde Kelani dans un cinéma de Sao Paulo, où il rencontre justement une jeunesse dans un théâtre où il fait justement sa conférence, où il présente son film. Par rapport à cette dimension donc du passé, peut-être que je peux le faire le lien avec mon troisième questionnement, Tunde Kelani s'empare quand même des sujets, c'est pas le seul. En tout cas, moi, je me suis beaucoup laissé aller dans ce que vous disiez sur Tunde et son cinéma, que je trouve pas du tout facile et pas du tout construit pour rapporter de la monnaie, de l'argent, mais au contraire vraiment ouvert sur ce que le cinéma a donné, et en fait prendre le cinéma comme un espace-temps offert au plus grand nombre, mais avec un souci vraiment de la justesse et de la qualité. Donc en fait, pour les réalisateurs nigérians, sans pointer du doigt, enfin sans donner un exemple a priori, est-ce que aller vers le passé, c'est forcément privilégier l'aspect historique? Je rejoins ce que disait aussi Laurent. Est-ce que c'est aller faire des recherches pour vraiment montrer un côté authentique, ou est-ce que on part sur une idée de l'histoire, sur une idée du passé? Et donc, je rebondis tout de suite sur, j'espère que c'est pas trop longue, je rebondis tout de suite sur ma dernière partie, qui est donc un questionnement par rapport à l'imaginaire. De quel imaginaire Nollywood est-il? L'imaginaire versus reality, versus le présent. Et je voudrais parler des décors, the scenery, des décors, et leur nécessité de montrer le passé, mais pas trop. Comme s'il y avait une espèce de danger d'en montrer trop. Et puisqu'il faut toujours être fédérateur, si on va parler d'une figurine, d'une sculpture, on va prendre quelque chose de lisse, sans véritablement annoncer à quel groupe de population, à quelle population appartient, par exemple un tabouret, par exemple un dessin sur un mur. Mais on a l'impression là encore, on donne une idée du passé, mais on va pas forcément dans la recherche exacte et anthropologique de ce qu'a pu produire une population. Par exemple, dans Abeni, le film qui a été tourné à la fois au Nigeria, mais surtout au Bénin, parce qu'il n'y avait plus suffisamment de villages montrant la rusticité de la vie villageoise. On voit des décors, c'est clair que ce sont des décors construits pour le film, mais on ne voit pas les dessins des maisons, des murs, on ne voit pas à quel groupe social, quel groupe de population ça a appartenu. Et je me demandais si c'était une volonté, pour moi je l'ai interprété comme volonté du réalisateur à ne pas trop en montrer, parce qu'en fait l'idée c'est le passé, et pas on est chez les Yoruba, on est chez les Igbo, et il y a premièrement ça, et deuxièmement, est-ce qu'il n'y a pas une retenue liée au monde religieux d'aujourd'hui? Par exemple, est-ce qu'il n'y a pas un frein à à montrer le passé sans pour autant effrayer le public, parce qu'un public pentecôtiste trouverait une gêne, parce qu'un public musulman trouverait une gêne, donc rester dans l'imaginaire de ce passé. comme si en fait il y avait une espèce de précaution prise. Bon, puis je vais peut-être m'arrêter là, mais j'aurais peut-être plein d'autres choses à rebondir après.
Merci beaucoup, Emmanuelle. Merci à vous trois pour ces commentaires très riches, intéressants et qui amènent, me semble, à des réflexions assez différentes et variées. Donc, je suis curieux d'entendre John vers ses réponses. Bien sûr, chacun d'entre vous, c'est après, vous voulez rebondir et puis on pourra ouvrir la discussion au public. Donc, John, it's up to you.
You've given me a lot to react to. But first of all, I just want to thank you because, you know, collectively, this really is the kind of richest and deepest response the book has gotten kind of in one place. And so, you know, I'm really grateful to you for having spent the time you must have spent wading into it and coming up with all these things to say. Let me respond in reverse order, if you don't mind. So Emmanuelle's point about the authenticity of settings, I mean, it's true, Nollywood has become, for better or for worse, maybe the major way in which young people get an image of the past of their country and, you know, of their cultures and so on. And a lot of thoughtful people think this is really a bad thing because, you know, the film, I record in the book a lot of people saying in scathing terms that most Nollywood films set in the past make no effort to be historically accurate at all. And that is a problem that can feel very disturbing if you think about it too much. On the other hand, there are people like Tunde Kalani, but there are also a lot of others who are serious about trying to do justice to the past. There's always been a minor kind of filmmaking by minor ethnic groups, smaller ethnic groups that don't have the resources to make films about their own culture on a regular basis. But from time to time, they'll gather their resources and you know, try to do something. The most substantial of this actually is in Benin, in the Bini language or Edo language, and Lancelot Imasuan is kind of the major figure in that kind of sub-industry. But often, you know, those films do really go out of their way to try to show all the traditional costumes and the artwork and so on and so forth. So, you know, there are filmmakers, there are films that take authenticity seriously. From the very beginning in Living in Bondage, money was spent hiring dance troupes to perform. You know, you have these scenes of weddings or other chieftaincy titles are being taken or something, but Nollywood has always done this, kind of scenes of public celebration that involve hiring dancers, hiring musicians, and sometimes those scenes go on at great length, you know, and obviously the film is sharing with the audience a pleasure in, yeah, this is our stuff. And I mean, I'm no expert in the way that dance, for instance, is preserved and passed on and continues to be a creative, changing thing in the villages. But this obviously is a really strong thing. And people who spend more time on the dance floors of, you know, clubs and Legos than I do and are in a position to understand what's going on, talk about how there's a constant, dance steps, dance movements, kind of being brought from the village and, brought into the most contemporary kinds of music. That's, an essential dynamic in Nigerian culture. And, it's something which is also going on in the movies. So, yeah, very hard to generalize. One more thing is, the teaching of history for a while disappeared completely from the curriculum in Nigerian schools. Some say that's because nobody wanted to talk about the Biafran War. But in any event, they decided everything else was more important than the history of Nigeria, which is just an unimaginable catastrophe from a cultural point of view, from a political point, from every point of view. Especially when you do have this very rapid process of urbanization and Pentecostalism, which has been a knife that's, or a machete that's cut many, many people off from their cultural roots because they're seen as the work of the devil and, a dangerous source of infection of some kind. So, yeah, again, Nollywood is not trustworthy in the big picture at all, but it does often show uli designs on the side of, traditional architecture. At the same moment when, there is an architectural museum in Jos, which I believe is just dissolved into a pile of mud, the government is doing nothing to preserve its own heritage. So you have to be grateful for what does come through in the film industry. And languages, the filmmakers have always been very conscious of what they were doing with the mixture of languages. And actually, in the last essay of mine, to be finished, it's about to come out from a new journal called Global Storytelling, based in Hong Kong. But I'm trying to remember the title of the essay I just finished. Nationalism from Below, State Failures, Nollywood, and Pidgin. And my argument, is basically that, the Nigerian state has continued to be a complete disaster. But I go on holding on to the idea of a Nigerian nation, and I think Nollywood does too. A lot of people do too. But it's not because they believe in the government. There's something else that is kind of now in the population. It's coming from below. And I identify Pidgin as being completely central to that. And in the last 20 years, especially in the last 10 years, there's been an astonishing kind of rise in the use of Pidgin in popular culture and its status. It's a way for young people whose relationship with their ancestral village has been weakened over a couple of generations. They're liable to not speak the language that their parents spoke as children, well at all, or if at all. But they're very attached to Pidgin, which is a way of being proudly Nigerian. There's a lot to say about this. It sets them in a transatlantic linguistic community. I mean, it's Pan-African, or at least Pan-West African, but it also links them with the Caribbean and with African-American vernacular speech and so on and so forth. So it's a way of marking themselves off against the purer English that, as you pointed out, was spoken in some of the earlier films. This is a way, but Pidgin was always associated with illiterate people, with the lower classes, with the comic element, you know, with the lowest kind of comedy. But now you look at the slickest films about hot young business people in Lagos who are driving a Lexus or a, you know, nice Mercedes or something. But when they're talking with their friends from university, or when they're talking about the most intimate matters, the things that matter the most, they slip into pidgin. They're slipping in and out, but it's, and it's a way of being Nigerian without being ethnic. You know, it's a language which sounds like an African language. It uses the vowel sounds and the consonants that the African languages of Nigeria use, and no other. So it doesn't sound like something a British person would say, you know? But at the same time, it doesn't identify you with, it doesn't place you within the often very contentious ethnic politics. It's such a problem in Nigeria. So it does something very, very important for people. And stand-up comedy, which has become an important genre, is entirely in pidgin. Hip-hop music, you know, the contemporary Nigerian music, which is so popular and so important as a cultural form, has pidgin at its center, and then it's slipping into other languages all the time, constantly. Code switching is just, you know, what is happening. So I find this really interesting and really hopeful. It changes completely the debates about what should be the language of African film, what should be the language of African literature, you know. Debates that got to be very sterile and futile, but they've been upset. Laurent, I mean, thank you for what you said about the way I move back and forth between a kind of documentary and social scientific business and the kind of text and texture of works of art. That was absolutely my central intention, was to keep both things in sight, you know, all the time as much as I possibly could. So, yeah. Where the classifications come from, I say somewhere, I think it might be in that preface, that they basically come from the video shops where I would buy these films. It was the discourse there. In only one case, there is this genre of films set abroad. And I never really found a Nigerian term for that kind of film, so I had to make up something. But the others all, so for instance, the term political film, I'm exactly using it to describe a kind of film that emerged at that moment in 1999 and was popular for a while and then kind of fell out of popularity. I mean, I think it's clear, I think everything is political, and, you know, the whole book is reading these various genres in a variety of different political ways. But yes, it is, and I think I said this somewhere, it is, political films are films about politicians, about state governors, about, you know, that's how they were defined in the popular. So yeah, I'm just following that. You know, about classification, yes, there are a lot of facts there. And in fact, before I published that book, I published a bibliography of academic work on Nigerian and Ghanaian films, which wasn't that much fun. It was a tremendous amount of work for me to do. But I wanted to show how much work had been done to establish the fact that there was a field here and have people within the field be aware of what else was being done. I also really wanted Nigerian scholars who published in Nigeria, which was the bulk of what had been written, to be visible. I have no intention of updating it. But anyway, you know, and part of the project of the book was, it's a very conservative, the conception of the book in some way is very conservative, like just define things, collect facts of filmography, to stabilize this as something to study, because to a remarkable degree, those collections of facts still don't exist. And if they don't, you pay for it. I mean, the film culture pays for it, and the academic culture around that film industry also goes in circles, and people keep repeating the same things over and over. So, you know, I was very deliberately trying to do something that was useful and, yeah, stabilizing. At the same time, I understand things like genre as being fluid. And, you know, the Bible thing, you know, I was a little afraid. I kind of noticed that it was becoming kind of monumental, and I didn't want to be freezing anything, because I don't understand things as frozen. And, you know, genres are always slippery, they're vague at the margins, and they change all the time. So this was, again, I say this in the preface, this was one set of generic terms that I could use to go in to this film industry and tell a bunch of stories about how different kinds of films evolved in relation to some social tension or some historical development. But, you know, no one else would write the same book, you know, at all. Classification, what else? The vigilante films and violence and presenting a bad image. I mean, one of the strong elements when Nollywood first appeared was shame on the part of the educated classes and official people of the bad image of Nigeria or of Africans that was being promulgated through these films. There was you know, it was enshrined in the code of the Nigerian Film Corporation that all films must, you know, provide a positive image of the nation, and crime must not pay, you know, and so on. And Nollywood really made people ashamed. And the technical quality, the fact that it wasn't cinema, you know, that it seemed like something less, that absolutely was the adjacent and, you know, argument that was coupled with it all of the time. So, but I think Lancelot wasn't bothered. I mean, again, the Bakassi Boys, it was such a phenomenon, and it focused so much. And Nigeria is a really violent place. People live in fear a lot. I mean, not everybody all the time, but when you ask what motivates people to tell a story, to watch a film, to, you know, what is it that they need to hear stories about? That, you know, the fear was, that's no small thing. And yeah, Nollywood, I mean, again, a lot of the book is about ways in which Nollywood's political imagination tried to grapple with these issues and gives people something to hang on to, or to put it more accurately, they were using the way people, they were getting the way people thought, making films structured in the way that that imagination, you know, kind of worked. One of the very best essays ever written about Nollywood was by John McCall, an anthropologist, called Juju and Justice at the Movies. And it was about the vigilante films. That was kind of central in it. And, you know, he mentions a couple of things, like walking around the streets of those cities in southeastern Nigeria where the Bakassi Boys operated, and hearing the soundtrack of Lancelot's film in his mind all the time, because it really seemed to be the soundtrack, you know, of this reality. It had a grip on it. And also once, you know, he saw a van full of Bakassi boys kind of coming down the street, waving their machetes and so on and so forth. And he was asking himself, should I run away, when he realized this was a movie that was being made. But, you know, it was a situation in which real life and these movies were so close together. That was a source of such power and a kind of social necessity that all other conditions, and they made money, you know. All other conditions became secondary, you know. And Thierno, you said a lot. Maybe I'll let Alessandro later on respond to the factoid that Nigeria is the second largest film industry and there are 2,000 films a year, because he's written more than once and very well about this. But let's see. There are people, Moradewa Adejumobi and Lindawe Dovey in particular, who've been trying to have African screen media be the name of the field in which we work. And I think that's a great idea, because especially coming from Nigeria, where television was such an important element in relation to the film culture from the beginning, television came first, which historically is really unusual, but interesting. So, you know, it's always been an artificial distinction, and the intervention of Iroko TV and Africa Magic with all of its serials and Ebony Life TV and now even Netflix, it just perpetuates, you know, it's completely part of that whole thing. And so I want you to know, I've seen all the films of Jean Renoir and Jean-Luc Godard and Ousmane Sembène and Souleymane Cissé, and that's where I came from. And when I got interested in African film, I made repeated pilgrimages to Fespaco, and I love that stuff, and I love a well-made film. But the debate about what is cinema and what isn't cinema seems sterile to me, frankly. And this book came out of my just dropping that problematic entirely and asking myself, okay, what is here? And, you know, I want to read this not in relation to some foreign standard, but as an expression of this country. One of the really odd things about me is I wasn't trained in African cinema. I mean, I had a lot of film courses as in the university, but I specialized for 20 years in English Renaissance literature, which I really loved for a long time, and then I didn't. And so I decided to do something else completely, and that turned out to be, you know, African something. I didn't know what, but post-colonial studies was just getting, post-colonial theory was gaining momentum at that moment. And I knew I didn't want to be a theoretician, even though I had experiences of various kinds that could have fed into that. But I wanted an area of expertise. And that turned into Africa, and then more or less by accident turned into Nigeria. But it was in Nigeria that I became educated as an Africanist on the campuses of the University of Nigeria in Nsukka and Ahmadu Bello University and the University of Ibadan and most recently University of Lagos. So, I mean, I already had tenure in an American university, a PhD, I'd published books, but I became a Nigerian intellectual. You know, I was learning from my colleagues and reading the stuff that had been published there and that was going on around me. The Nigerian university system was already in catastrophically bad shape, but there was enough left, enough people left, that I could learn from a Jibo Ibrahim and a Raufu Mustafa and a Obiora Udechukwu. And, you know, I really looked up to these people and learned from them. And anyway, so I kind of acquired the position of a Nigerian nationalist because that's where the culture of the university came from. This is an odd development, but no way that's, again, I didn't realize this until much after the fact, but that's really where this book comes from. The central question for me was not, is this cinema, or, you know, how can it become cinema? But yeah, how is it expressing the nation or different places? I mean, I was also trying to distinguish various centers of production and of creative energy and so on and so forth, because the thing that really caught me in Nigeria was it was just so big and there was no end to structures of production and of creative energy. And yeah, so but I like your point, I mean, about how Nigerian film does not equal Nollywood. This book, you know, when I got into this, Nollywood desperately needed to be understood in its own terms. So that was my project, and it's still a project of this book. Try to, yeah, find a way of talking about it that's appropriate to that situation. Don't feed its genres or the technical standards or anything into machinery formed elsewhere, you know, because that can't work well. So this took a lot of work and a lot of specialized knowledge, right? And there's a problem now. Again, Moderateur has been one of the people at the forefront of thinking about these issues, where there was a special section of a cinema journal on this question. I mean, African cinema studies has always been marginalized within the structures of film studies in the US. I won't venture to talk about France. But within that, Nollywood is just totally excluded, or let in only in the most token way. So, you know, what to do in a situation like this. African studies also as a discipline has been shrinking. The funding is being cut. The old ideologies that made people want to take a course in African film because it allowed them to connect with Mother Africa, you know, that has really decayed. They'd much rather see a film be in a course that's full of films from the diaspora, which are closer to them and technically better and, you know, faster, flashier, more on their wavelength. So, you know, this thing I decided to devote my life to in some way, those formations have been shrinking, damaged or destroyed by, it's the same neoliberalism that wrecked the Nigerian university system and university systems all over Africa that's also affected me very personally in the US in ways I don't need to get into it, but if you wonder who the enemy is, that's them. But we are, I think, you know, there'll be a lot more talk about this in the coming days. But the you know, Nollywood, that book now, even to me, seems to describe a historical period which one has to be careful because that Nollywood is still making a whole lot of films in Onitsha and Asaba and so on. But what the media attention and critical attention is all to Kunle Afolayan and you know, what's on Netflix and what's making it to film festivals and so on and so forth. And that's happened to me too. So yeah, that world has begun to seem bracketed historically now in a way that wasn't, I mean, I saw it coming. There's a epilogue, if anybody got that far, which is, you know, unlike the rest of the book because it's journalistic. I'm reporting on a trip I made in June of 2013, which is when I closed the research for the book and all this new stuff was coming and it's a kind of breathless, oh my God, you know. It interests me that 3 of the younger American scholars who work on Nollywood, film people, Connor Ryan and Noah Tsika and Matt Brown, are all writing books that involve at least the prehistory of Nigeria. And, you know, they're trying to, when Nollywood emerged, it was, in a lot of ways, a really sharp break with everything that came before. And again, new terms had to be created with which to understand it. But Brian also talks about this in his piece, and you pick it up as well. I like it that, you know, there's a lot of serious scholarly attention now to trying to describe this history, which is very hard to do because the films have mostly disappeared and the cinemas are torn down, most of them, so it's hard work and they're working at it, you know. So this is great. What else do I want to say? I'm going to say just one more thing, which has to do with the diaspora, which is so interesting. And in Nigeria, the media are full of people from the diaspora in some way. The biggest players, Jason Njoku, who runs Iroko TV, or Mo Abudu, who's the biggest of all the movie moguls and a TV personality and so on and so forth, or the people who started Film House Cinemas and Film One Distribution Company. I'm sure you know all of this, but they spent years in the UK learning the business and so on. And I mean, I read film credits obsessively. But even when I'm just channel surfing at home in New York, and at the end of most movies these days, it turns, there will be Igbo names and Yoruba names, in all kinds of capacities. Camera people or makeup, just something. And are they actually Nigerians? Are they the children of Nigerians? Or, what? But there's just a huge, huge, huge resource there for Nigeria, and that's great. I mean, the brain drain that Nigeria suffered from, really from the 60s, but especially in the 80s and 90s and ever since, has been, a historical catastrophe of enormous dimensions. But they're getting something back. This is the dividend in some way. All right, let me.
Thank you so much, John.
Nice conclusion.
Indeed. And we have the possibility to open it up to the audience. And I already know that Jamila wanted to say something and ask probably a question. So Jamila, please go ahead. We can't hear you. Please should turn the mic on.
Okay, there you go. Hello, I hope you can hear me well, because my...
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you so much, Jonathan Haynes, for your presentation and also for the introduction of your book. And that was introduced by Thierno, by Laurent, and Emmanuelle. Now, my contribution really is coming from a personal perspective. A diasporan from the UK, from London, but been based in France for over 10 years now. So yeah. So, and I am a political scientist, but also tapping back into my origins of obviously Ghanaian and Nigerian roots from my maternal side. And I was quite pleased to hear that you taught at AB University in Zaria. So it's quite interesting to learn that. Now, I find your responses quite interesting and really, really in-depth. And what I wanted to add, not really a question, but really to add, is from the diasporan perspective. And you mentioned about Nigerian diaspora, and also, I'm going to talk from the Ghanaian diaspora, but also a little bit about the Nigerian, and also the language. Nollywood movies, I look at it from this perspective, particularly from the UK angle, is that it played an important role in extending the Nigerian culture to the diaspora, particularly the second generation diaspora, third and fourth generation diaspora in the UK. And things that their parents were not able to transfer to their kids. The Nollywood movies was able to perhaps play a role in also changing the narrative of Africa. I remember growing up in London, in England, a lot of the images that we used to see about Africa on the BBC, on Sky News, or on the British television was really about, famine-ridden African children with flies all over the faces, Oxfam adverts, and all that. But the Nollywood movies show the different face of Nigeria, or perhaps Africa, really, seeing middle class, upper middle class Africans living in, beautiful homes and driving nice cars. Of course, this is not the whole of Africans living like that, but it showed a different narrative. So second generation Africans who having problem identity issues saw that as an alternative to say, oh, okay, so Africa is not all about what we've been seeing about Oxfam adverts and all these other very positive adverts about the African continent. Of course, it exists, but I think the other face of the narrative was not shown. So it was quite interesting to see that from the Nollywood movies, particularly in the mid 2000s. You had all these movies that were out. And also in terms of language, you talked about Pidgin English. Pidgin English is very famous in Nigeria, I rightly said. It has become the lingua franca for the youth or whoever wants to sound very, very modern or very, connected to the Nigerians from the top and the Nigerians at the bottom. Clearly, everybody understands Pidgin pigeon, regardless of you being Hausa, Yoruba, Igbo, etc. But also pigeon is also spoken in Ghana, for example, where, you know, I know more than the Nigerian side of my family. I know Ghana more than Nigeria. And also, so really, the Nollywood movies has also helped the Kenyans to perhaps learn a bit about the pidgin and also understand pidgin. Why am I talking about pidgin? Because in recent times, Afrobeat has become the new music among the youth in the diaspora. And as you all know, being very conversant with Nigeria, so if you're listening to Fela Kuti's music, Fela doesn't speak the English that you and I are speaking. Fela's music is in pidgin. And all these other young Nigerians who are singing Afrobeat are singing in pidgin. So for the second generation, pidgin has become important for them to learn one way or the other in order to understand these Afrobeat music. Another aspect also is traditional languages. You know, mentioned about growing up in London. Of course, I speak Hausa, but maybe my Hausa was not very perfect. But watching Nollywood, I would rather say Kannywood movies, helped to improve my Hausa, my understanding of Hausa, because the Hausa I spoke was very much a Hausa mixed with a lot of English words. Watching Nigerian movies, Kannywood movies helped to improve that. And that was the same my Nigerian friends who were either Yoruba, who are of second generation as I am, or who were Igbo, were also perhaps did not learn full Yoruba by watching Nigerian movies, but they learned few words. So I could say, but Nollywood movies, we have to look at it from the positive in the diaspora. An extension of changing the African narrative and also helping the second generation to have ownership of their identity, particularly those who might be in the process of suffering from identity crisis, really, because you do have some second generations who don't feel as if they're, or they are just looked upon as misfits. And these movies can give them hope of looking at things from this perspective. My other second comment really comes down to what you talked about. Emmanuelle also touched upon that. It's also about, this is more to do with politics. I think it was Laurent who, sorry, Emmanuelle.
That's important.
Yeah.
The north in Nigeria, what is quite interesting to look at it is that you talked about Nollywood, but do you include Kannywood as Nollywood? Do you include the various Nigerian movies in the various languages as Nollywood? And if so, what is all this whole politics between Kannywood, Nollywood, this whole, you know, Orthodox Christian and also extreme Muslim groups' views about, you know, the representation of women in Nigerian movies and traditions, you know, and how is the Nigerian government instrumentalizing that through the movie industry or not? And also, how is the Nigerian movie industry using the cinema space to sort of talk about political issues? We saw the End the SARS movement last year, and there have been also other forms of, you know, social issues that have been depicted in Nigerian movies. So how does politics interfere with Nollywood, particularly discussing about social malaise issues within the Nigerian society that perhaps not that many people will be able to voice it out, but the cinema can stand as an alternative to stand up to government. I hope I haven't, you know, spoken too much, but, you know, I haven't read your book, but from what I've heard, it sounds quite passionate, and I look forward to sort of reading it to sort of stimulate my mind and take the debate to another level. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Jamila. The sound here wasn't that good, so I just summarizing maybe the two main questions, particularly what I got as the main question and comments. One was about the way these films work for the representation of Nigeria and Africa outside of Africa, and how they managed to present a different perspective on the continent that has also allowed particularly people in the diaspora to feel more connected to this modern Africa, urban Africa, middle class Africa, and so on. And another comment was about the language difference again, maybe under a different angle, which is the internal fragmentation of the industry, in particular the contraposition between the North and the South. And where is Kannywood here? She was asking, is Kannywood in the book somehow or not, and why? And more generally, how this balance play out? How do you see it? And there was the last comment also in connection to the political transformation, more recent, and SARS and other movements. How do they have an impact on creative industries, and particularly Nollywood? I hope, Jamila, I managed to summarize. And please go ahead.
Very good. Well done.
In the preface, I very elegantly excuse myself from discussing House of Films or really Yoruba ones, except when I felt like doing it. In terms of what's Nollywood and what isn't, you know, this is a discussion that quickly becomes sterile in my mind. I like to use it to describe English language films or the industry that produces films primarily in English. Right, so even though they started out in Igbo, and now, you know, sometimes Lancelot makes films in Bini and so on and so forth, but whereas, you know, Kannywood really is a different, kind of fundamental for me is that Kannywood and the Yoruba filmmakers have their own professional organizations, they have their own production structures, they have their own distribution structures. So just in those concrete material ways, they are separate industries. Some people in Kannywood, you know, Nollywood is like the most successful branding move in the history of the world. You know, so there are a lot of Yoruba filmmakers who would kind of want to be included in it. I think there are probably more Kannywood filmmakers who would rather not be included and seen as doing a separate thing, which is different. I mean, they need maybe politically and culturally to differentiate themselves from the Southern films. So yeah, all my talk about Nollywood nationalism, there is this huge paradox. And the use of pidgin also, you know, I'm really talking about Southern Nigeria with outposts in other places, but it's different in the North. So yeah, that's a problem. The pidgin thing, yeah, we agree completely. The role of Fela in this is, I mean, everybody points to him as really the central figure. And one of the strangest things I've ever seen is the way in which Fela has become kind of official culture now in Nigeria. And, you know, when Macron went to the New Africa Shrine, I mean, the New Africa Shrine is pretty different from the old Africa Shrine, but nevertheless, that, you know, Fela, anyway. But the linguistic thing, and it also, you know, what you were saying about these images of middle-class Black people in Africa, it's been so crucial for Blacks in the diaspora to see these images of, you know, Africans who aren't starving and or, you know, killing each other or something. And when I was teaching at Long Island University, I had a lot of Haitian and Jamaican students. And in both Haiti and Jamaica, the guy selling Nigerian films across the street from my office, literally, was selling 80% of his customers were Haitian. Mm-hmm. I asked one of my students, why is your grandmother addicted to these films, and she went and asked her grandmother, and her grandmother's reply was, so she could keep up with what was going on at home. And finally, you know, the political thing, this is a big issue, and I'm waiting for someone to write a really good article about film and SARS, that movement. I mean, of course, musicians were really important, and, you know, radio DJs and so on, media people in general, really crucial in that movement. And, you know, I remembered more than once the way during the Arab Spring 10 years ago, people talked about how one of the essential motivations behind that was young people were demanding to live in a normal country, what they thought of as a normal country, which is something they had never experienced, but they saw it, they got it through the media. And I think, you know, so, I mean, I've always been critical of Nollywood films which represent the sort of neoliberal bubble in Lagos, or, you know, the other nodes of neoliberal kind of prosperity in Nigeria, where people are, you know, busy living professional lives and having the romantic dilemmas that people in late capitalist societies have, and so on and so forth. And, you know, I mean, most films don't detach that completely from the national reality. Some do, and it really bothers me when it happens. But even those images of a kind of late capitalist normality, I was rethinking their political valence, you know, in the wake of NSARS and the Arab Spring. So I don't know. This is very complicated. Again, there are films that address political issues pretty directly. Most of them don't. A lot of them are escapist. It's not, at least I can't produce a simple, you know, diagnosis of this situation, but you know, yeah, there was for this moment a successful genre people were calling political films, but the argument of this long book is the whole, you know, I'm kind of looking at the whole of Nigeria under the umbrella of a historical reaction, you know, which is political and cultural and social and moral and spiritual, you know, all at the same time. But people are really thinking about, you know, reacting to what's going on. And it all feeds into the future somehow.
Thank you very much, John, for the answer. And we have 3 minutes left, or more if needed. But I mean, if there is any other question, there are a couple of comments in the chat, but rather than just say thanks and people who had to leave before. And
what about the 2000 movies?
You want to hear about that one? Then I will be happy to say that Thierno, numbers about Nigerian films are generally invented. But it's a very complicated thing in which at a certain moment of history, particularly the Nigerian Census Board had an important role in producing numbers that ended up being in UNESCO reports compared to numbers produced in completely different ways. So, for instance, because for this UNESCO report in particularly, the UNESCO asked each nation to provide numbers. So there is no research behind it, but it's like local agents that produce the numbers. And so it depends completely from what type of criteria they adopt. And at that point in time, also because the person sitting at the Nigerian Census Board was someone coming from the private sector and had an idea of how valuable it was to give out numbers to get people to invest in the industry. He included in the numbers all type of films made in Nigeria that went through the census board, and according to the law, all films produced could be almost a wedding video. If it is sold in the video club, needs to go through that. And secondly, put all screening venues, the large majority informal screening venues, as cinemas. So you have an insane amount of theater halls in Nigeria for what is the reality. When neighboring Burkina Faso, it was 3 or 5 cinemas, when, as a matter of fact, the cinema theater culture was back then much stronger in Burkina Faso than in Nigeria. You know, we are talking about the key report that was in the mid-2000s, and that is the report that was then quoted in articles across the world, from the New York Times to whatever, saying, oh, look, Nigeria is, because that thing put Nigeria as the second largest film industry in the world. That was taken by all possible journals, and then in Nigeria it started a debate out of nothing about where do you position Nollywood in the rank. But then again, if you take Hollywood and if you reason in the same way, Bollywood produces maybe 6,000 films a year. But the problem is that their census board only used to categorize only celluloid films, and now expanded it to a more hybrid issue about technology, but it's a totally different production system. And the same could be said about the US. If you count all the films that are made, they are well above the 2000s. So, I mean, all these things is somehow sapiently maneuvered. It's not a project. It somehow it happened. Many of the things happened more or less by accident. People were very happy to find that story and give it such a publicity, and it worked perfectly well for the Nigerian industry. But it's basically there are no common criteria in the comparison, so these numbers don't make sense. If then we start considering the same type of films or same format all over the world, then you will have a completely different statistic or list, in which probably China would come first, US, India. Nigeria would still fare pretty high, but it's never. And yeah. So.
But Jonathan, you gave a figure at page 302 by the National Bureau of Statistics, around 1,800 plus something. It's very close, but it's a national statistic. It is not.
But even the national statistics,
it's a good thing for me. It's concrete.
The Census Board used to do a fairly good job of counting all the films that they processed, which was never all the films made, but most of them. Okay, but as Alessandro has said, they quite naturally, when asked how many films were produced in Nigeria, that was the number they gave. The international standard was films that have had a major theatrical release and a budget of at least $500,000. And by those criteria, there were maybe 2 Nigerian films, which would have also been wildly misrepresenting what was going on. So it is a comedy of errors.
And indeed, I think what's important is also, it really was important to give visibility to something that was indeed very effective. I mean, the Nigerian films throughout the 2000s in particular were made in a format that it was out of the radar of this kind of statistics and out of the radar of the international organization. So what the UNESCO legitimized was, let's try to find other ways of counting that correspond more closely to reality, because people indeed were watching and are watching Nollywood films throughout the continent. So you couldn't not say something about Nollywood. Your report would have sounded strange, but in order to do it, they had to force the logics of numbers in a way that then, if you analyze them closely, they also don't make sense. So it's this very complicated balance between.
Also, other things during the discussion was the centrality of Pidgin, or as you say, Jonathan, and Jamila underlined Emmanuelle and Laurent also, how it was so important for this film to express in Pidgin. The irony is the Oscar Academy disqualified a line heard by Genevieve Nedji just because the English language was the majority of the dialogue in her film. Even he said Jamila used the word lingua franca. English is the lingua franca for Nigerians, but for the academy they did not understood it. Even somebody like Ava DuVernay, she protested why they have been disqualified just for the language. At the same time, film from Algeria or Senegal can be qualified even by using French language. It's just irony I would like to underline.
It's a very interesting topic that brings us elsewhere, but it's interesting.
Who was written in English, but not in Hebrew, because actually
I don't know if anybody in the online still wants to make any comment or question. Otherwise, this will be available soon online. We recorded it and I'll post it on the website of the chaire Diasporas africaines, and will also be in the podcast of the Laboratoire des Africains du Monde, which is I think is a YouTube channel, and we normally put without the images, especially in conditions like this, because there is no PowerPoint presentation and there is no, we don't need to ask for, because officially we need to ask every single one of you to have sign as a letter that authorizes to put your face online. So we'd rather put just the sound, which is largely enough, I think. All right, I think we are done. Thank you very much to all of you online and to you here.